We are military analytics. Everyone can make mistakes, but when people realize that they have made a mistake, they give up their decision. And what happens if they don't admit they made a mistake? They make new mistakes to make up for each mistake and end up in a corner. Russian President Vladimir Putin is also cornered because he keeps making mistakes. The latest news coming out of Russia reveals that Putin is in deep chaos. Every day there are different crises in the Russian army. Problems within the army have now escalated, especially the moves made by the Wagner Group. Executives have raised tensions in the Russian army. This situation is also reflected on the Russian people. The last mistake made by the Wagner Group has caused tensions in Russia to rise too much. Putin does not have enough means to end the tension. There could be chaos in Russia at any moment. And what did Wagner Group do? What is the reason for the tension in Russia? How will this tension affect the course of the war? The Wagner Group has been one of the most damaging to Putin in recent years. In fact, Wagner was expected to support Putin a lot. But the Wagner Group made many moves that put Putin in a difficult situation. As you know, Russian President Vladimir Putin was a great supporter of the establishment of the Wagner Group. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, was one of Putin's most trusted people. Prigozhin was referred to as Putin's chief. But after the Wagner Group gained power, the situation changed. Now, Prigozhin is one of Putin's enemies. One of the most important reasons for the growing tension between Prigozhin and Putin is the illegal activities of the Wagner Group. The soldiers of the Wagner Group commit many war crimes. The soldiers of the Wagner Group do not follow any rules and fight brutally. Their atrocities are often talked about all over the world, especially their execution methods are on the world's agenda. It is not known exactly how many people the Wagner Group has executed so far. However, videos of some of these executions are being shared. In the videos, it is seen that the Wagner Group uses hammers to execute people. This brutal method is one of the most important features of the Wagner Group. On the other hand, the Wagner Group is also known for its illegal business activities. Wagner is alleged to have made illegal profits, especially by trading arms and drugs. Many countries condemn the Wagner Group for these allegations. However, as a result of the Wagner Group's lack of transparency on this issue, many countries reacted to Russia. This has also affected Russia's economy because many countries have imposed economic sanctions against Russia. As a result, the crisis between the Kremlin and the Wagner Group is growing. Nevertheless, the cooperation between Wagner and the Kremlin continued because the Russian army suffered a heavy defeat in Ukraine. Putin knows that he has to use the Wagner Group to win this war. That's why the Kremlin government gives the Wagner Group many special rights. The most interesting of these rights is related to prisons. The Wagner Group is trying to take prisoners from prisons to the battlefield. Talking to the prisoners, the Wagner leaders make them an offer. According to this offer, if the prisoners join the Wagner Group, they will be free when the war is over. Prisoners who would have to live in prison for many years accept this offer and join the Wagner Group. But most of these prisoners die on the battlefield, because Wagner leaders assign these prisoners to the most dangerous conflicts. After this was revealed, the number of prisoners who agreed to join the Wagner Group began to decline. No one accepts the offers of the Wagner directors anymore. This made the Wagner managers very angry because the Wagner Group suffered a heavy defeat on the battlefield. After many Wagner soldiers die, new soldiers are asked to join the group. But because no new soldiers are joining, the number of soldiers in the Wagner Group is rapidly decreasing. The Wagner faction is in a deep decline. In a report published at the beginning of March, the U.S. security authorities published data on the deaths of soldiers in the Wagner Group. According to this data, more than 9,000 Wagner soldiers were killed in combat in just 1 month. According to experts, this number is increasing every day. The Wagner Group is suffering a historic defeat. To solve this problem, the Wagner Group decided to increase its activities in prisons. A large number of managers were assigned for this. Wagner managers went to Russian prisons and started meeting with prisoners. But something strange happened during these meetings. 500 Russian prisoners were assigned to work at the factory to serve their sentences. 150 of these soldiers were taken to the railroad repair factory in Stakhanov, but the prisoners were met at the factory by soldiers of the Wagner Group. 30 Wagner soldiers asked the prisoners to join the war, but the prisoners refused. Prisoners who refused to join the Wagner Group were ill-treated. These prisoners were removed from the area and taken elsewhere. However, no one knew where the prisoners were taken. The Russian prisoners were very frightened by this and said that they agreed to join the army. Most of these prisoners were sent to the Luhansk region after completing their military training, but that's when the truth came out. One of the Russian prisoners made a phone call to his family before joining the army. In the call, he said, "There are 150 of us here locked in a railroad repair shop. We were stupidly sold. We didn't accept it." Another prisoner said, "We have no other choice. Those who said no have already been taken away. I don't know what happened to them now. These Wagner people came, you see. They don't care now. They are going to kill us and throw us in the field, and that's it." After these phone calls were published by independent news agencies, everyone in Russia was outraged, especially the Russian soldiers. Then Russian soldiers learned that the Wagner Group was forcibly recruiting prisoners into the army. They changed their relations with the Wagner Group leaders. Russian soldiers now have a very harsh attitude towards the leaders of the Wagner Group. This is ruining the reputation of the Wagner Group. The growing tension between the Wagner Group and Russian soldiers worries the Kremlin. British intelligence prepared a report on this issue. According to the report, Russian soldiers may start a revolt against the Wagner Group. It has been known for a long time that Russian soldiers and Wagner executives had disagreements. But if a mutiny breaks out as a result of this incident, the Russian army could suffer a very heavy loss. Putin has asked for special measures to be taken against the risk of mutiny. Putin is very afraid of a mutiny in the Russian army. Putin is living a nightmare. What do you think about this tension in the Russian army? What do you think about the Wagner Group? Do you think the Wagner Group is really powerful? What do you think about the Wagner rulers recruiting prisoners into the army? The casualties of soldiers are constantly increasing. According to the latest information, more than 220,000 soldiers of the Russian army and the private military company Wagner Group were killed and injured in total. Vladimir Putin, who wanted to increase the number of soldiers at the front, found the solution in compulsory military service. This week, a decree was signed ordering the spring conscription of Russian civilians totaling 150,000 people between the ages of 18 and 27. How will this affect the war? Let's evaluate this for once. The War Studies Institute said that Vladimir Putin's spring conscription of civilians will not increase Russia's combat power in the short term and may even backfire in the long term. 150,000 war-age men were called in earlier this week to begin training. However, it is explained that Putin's forces stationed in Ukraine are suffering from declining numbers and low morale. He shared that a call should be made for reservists and volunteers who want to take part in a special military operation instead of enlisting non-combatant civilians at training facilities in Russia. It was discussed that some of the civilians who were sent with conscription before had only a few days of military training. It was shared that the conscripted civilians were given an assault rifle last February and were unaware of whom they were fighting and for what. After they were ordered to go to Ukraine to die in droves, there was palpable tension. Inside, images emerged in rare occasions of public opposition to the Kremlin as Russian mothers came together to denounce the conscription of their teenage sons, many of whom had returned from Ukraine in wooden coffins. This mismanagement appears to be preventing Putin's re-enlistment. Instead, it is forced to send reservists and volunteers to Ukraine who may be less war-ready. The act of preventing further tensions with the Russian people and balancing the steady flow of incoming troops while maintaining adequate personnel in Ukraine has now become his second battle. The chairman of the Russian State Defense Committee, Andrei Kartopolov, confirmed on the 30th of March that conscripts will not be sent to the Russian-occupied areas in Ukraine in the spring of 2023. It is argued that this press release was made to address concerns caused by a miscalculation when conscripts were sent to the front last spring. They also noted that the sinking of Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet with some enlisted sailors on board, caused further tensions amongst the population. According to claim, there was a great deal of political dissatisfaction. This decree means that Putin does not care about the political cost of sending troops to the front lines. A greater response is expected than was shown last September for tens of thousands of war-era Russian citizens who had to flee to avoid having to fight in Ukraine. Putin's decision not to enlist from the spring of 2022, in response to Ukraine's counteroffensive in the Kharkiv Oblast in September 2022, choosing instead to mobilize reserve forces to stabilize the collapsing front lines is the reason for Putin's refusal to repeat the mistakes of last February, cited as proof of their reluctance. But despite the Russians' failure to force them to fight in Ukraine, refusing to step back from the normal spring conscription order, the SRB said Russia's local training facilities would now go to waste. Russia has limited training capacity, and dedicating it to training non-combatants in 2023 deprives the Kremlin of the opportunity to train reservists and volunteers to fight the eyes shared. The Kremlin may seek to increase its combat personnel in Ukraine by forcing conscripts who are finishing their one-year service in the spring of 2022 to sign military contracts, because these newly discharged conscripts will need less additional training before being sent to Ukraine, he shared. However, they added, it is far from clear how successful such an effort will be. Western officials and the Ukrainian military spoke of an impending Russian spring offensive at the beginning of the year, nearly 6 months after Putin announced partial mobilization in September. But such efforts, led by General Valery Gerasimov, have failed to achieve any success beyond what the British Ministry of Defense has defined marginal gains, and Putin has run out of options. What is implied in its assessment is that Putin and his war generals must now seek a solution to balance the need for more troops in Ukraine without causing further internal chaos, especially ahead of the expected Ukrainian counteroffensive in the coming weeks and months. It was announced that it was planned to increase the upper limit to 30 for the 18 to 27 age range, which was previously practiced in military service in Russia. According to analysts, the idea of extending the plan to raise the lower limit over time aims to close the manpower shortage caused by heavy losses in Ukraine. Andrei Kartapolov, chairman of the Defense Committee of the Russian Parliament, stated that Russia could increase the upper age limit for compulsory military service to 30 in the spring, and that the lower age limit can only be increased from 18 to 21 after a transition period of 1 to 3 years. It is thought that Russia will make the change in order to make up for the huge manpower shortages caused by the plans to increase the current number of soldiers by 30% and the heavy losses in the war in Ukraine. In another statement, Kartapolov rejected the statement that this change would be made to increase the number of soldiers and said the number of soldiers we have decreases every year and this number will not increase. Kartapolov also added that with the amendment, the number of people to be recruited is expected to be around 200,000. In December last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin supported the Defense Ministry's proposals to raise the current age range for mandatory military service from 18 to 27 to 21 to 30. Russia plans to increase the number of soldiers from 1.15 million to 1.5 million. In December last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin supported the Defense Ministry's proposal to raise the current age range for mandatory military service from 18 to 27 to 21 to 30. On the other hand, in September last year, Russia declared mobilization for the first time since the Second World War due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and recruited more than 300,000 people. These calls for mobilization also led to many anti-war demonstrations in the country. Many people were detained. At least 1,000 people were detained in Russia, mainly in St. Petersburg and Moscow, for political detentions and arrests. The prosecutor's office in Moscow warned that calling and participating in illegal protests could be punishable by up to 15 years in prison. It is predicted that the mobilization decision will cause many Russian youth to try to leave the country as soon as possible after this decision. It is estimated that the Russian stock market may fall rapidly. In light of these developments, we will see the effects of the events in the coming days together.